The Copa Room inside the legendary Sands Hotel was not just another showroom in Las Vegas. In 1965, it was the stage where reputations were made and legends were crowned. The room held about 450 guests, and every seat meant status. High-rolling gamblers from New York, movie stars from Hollywood, and wealthy tourists all packed into the smoky, glittering space hoping to witness magic. When the headliner stepped onto that stage, the room belonged to him. And on the night of October 12th, 1965, the man who owned the room was Dean Martin. Dean was already a king of Vegas by then, with a drink in his hand, a tuxedo perfectly relaxed on his shoulders, and that effortless charm that made audiences adore him. He could turn a room silent with just one line. The orchestra played smoothly behind him as he sang one of his signature songs, his voice floating through the room like velvet. Everything was perfect. The audience leaned forward, glasses clinked softly, and the night seemed destined to become another classic performance in Vegas history. Then the door opened. 6 men walked in through the side entrance, moving like they owned the place. They didn't wait for the maitre d'. They didn't whisper apologies or politely look for their table. They pushed past a waiter carrying drinks, sending glasses crashing to the floor. The sharp sound shattered the atmosphere. Conversation stopped. The orchestra hesitated, and the entire room turned to look at the source of the disturbance. At the front of the group stood a thick-shouldered man with a confident smirk and cold eyes. His name was Vincent "Vinny the Shark" Battaglia, a man known throughout the Southwest for running loan sharking operations and maintaining connections with powerful organized crime families. In Vegas, people knew better than to challenge him, but that night he chose the wrong room. "Don't stop on my account, Dino," Vinny called loudly, his voice echoing through the silent showroom. The orchestra slowed to a stop. Dean Martin calmly placed the microphone back on its stand and looked down at the man standing near the stage. "Show's in progress," Dean said smoothly. "If you want a table, ask the maitre d'. He'll take care of you." Vinny laughed. It wasn't friendly laughter. It sounded more like a warning. "I don't ask for tables," he replied. "I take them." He pointed toward a front-row table where an elderly couple sat enjoying the show. The couple froze instantly, their faces pale as the room filled with tension. "You two," Vinny said coldly, "move." The elderly man slowly began to stand, clearly terrified. "Stay right where you are," Dean said firmly. The words cut through the room like a knife. The easygoing singer everyone knew had disappeared. Something stronger had taken his place. The couple sat back down, unsure what would happen next. Vinny's smile vanished as he stared up at the stage. "What did you just say?" "I said they stay where they are," Dean replied calmly. "You want a table? There are empty ones in the back. Otherwise, wait in the bar until the show's over." The tension in the room became unbearable. Even the musicians shifted nervously. Everyone knew who Vinny was. Everyone knew what he was capable of. No one expected a singer to challenge him. Vinny walked closer to the stage, his shoes clicking loudly across the floor. "You know who I am?" he asked. "I know exactly who you are." "Then you know I'm not someone you disrespect." Dean lifted his drink and took a slow sip before answering. "And I'm not someone who lets bullies push around customers in my showroom." Vinny's face turned red with anger. No one spoke to him like that. Not in Vegas. Not anywhere. "My money's as good as anyone's here," he said. "The table's taken," Dean replied. "Not anymore." Vinny snapped his fingers, and 2 of his men started moving toward the elderly couple. That was when something unexpected happened. Dean Martin stepped off the stage. He walked straight down the steps and positioned himself between the 2 large men and the frightened couple. He wasn't big, about 5'10", maybe 170 pounds, but he didn't move an inch. "You're not touching them," he said quietly. The entire showroom went silent. 450 people watched a singer stand face to face with men who looked like they belonged in a boxing ring. But Dean didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there. Vinny studied him carefully, searching for fear. He didn't find any. "You're making a big mistake," Vinny said. "It's Dean," he replied calmly. "And the only mistake here is thinking you can walk into my show and act like you own the place." The 2 men stood there staring at each other while the room held its breath. Finally, Vinny spoke again. "Fine," he said slowly. "We'll sit in the back, for now. But after the show, you and I are going to have a conversation." He turned and walked toward the back of the room with his entourage trailing behind him. They sat at a corner table, watching the stage with cold, silent expressions. Dean climbed back onto the stage, picked up the microphone, and glanced at the orchestra. "Where were we?" he said casually. "Oh yeah, Volare." The music started again, and he continued singing as if nothing had happened. But everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The rest of the show was electric. Dean performed with more energy than ever, delivering jokes about bullies and tough guys while the audience roared with laughter and applause. By the time he finished with "Everybody Loves Somebody," the crowd jumped to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Yet in the back corner, Vinny Battaglia sat quietly, staring at the stage. Later that night, after the audience had left, Vinny summoned Dean to meet him in the casino. Dean went without hesitation. His manager nearly fainted with fear, but the singer walked through the casino floor like he was heading to dinner with a friend. The meeting was tense but surprisingly short. Vinny accused him of embarrassing him. Dean replied calmly, explaining that he simply refused to let anyone bully innocent people in his show. The conversation ended with an uneasy truce, but the story didn't end there. Word spread across Las Vegas by the next morning. Other entertainers began talking about the moment when Dean Martin had stood up to a mobster without raising his voice or throwing a punch. 3 days later, Vinny received a visit from powerful figures connected to organized crime in Chicago. They weren't pleased that he had made such a public scene. His reputation and their business depended on staying invisible. They ordered him to fix the situation. So that Friday night, Vinny returned to the Sands alone. He left a note in Dean's dressing room asking to meet at the bar. When Dean arrived, the mobster surprised him by doing something almost unimaginable. He apologized, not only for disrupting the show, but for terrifying the elderly couple. Dean listened quietly, then made a simple request. If Vinny truly wanted to make things right, he should find the couple and apologize to them personally. A few days later, the couple visited Dean before a show, their eyes filled with tears. Vinny had found them and apologized exactly as Dean suggested. It was a moment that changed more than anyone realized. Months later, Vinny Battaglia was arrested by federal authorities on racketeering charges. He eventually served many years in prison. But before his trial, he sent Dean a letter thanking him for reminding him what courage looked like and what kind of man he once wanted to be. Years later, when asked about the toughest moment of his career, Dean Martin didn't talk about critics or bad performances. He simply said that sometimes in life, you have to choose between doing what's safe and doing what's right. And that night in 1965, standing in front of 450 people at the Sands Hotel, he chose what was right. Not with violence, not with anger, just with quiet courage. And that was enough to turn a singer into a legend. The story didn't fade after that night. In the days that followed, whispers traveled through every casino corridor in Las Vegas. Dealers, waiters, musicians, and performers all talked about the moment Dean Martin calmly stood up to a feared mob figure without raising his voice. In a city where power usually belonged to money and muscle, that kind of quiet courage was rare. When Vincent Battaglia returned to apologize days later, it confirmed something people were already starting to believe. Real strength isn't loud. It doesn't need threats or fists. It stands firm when others stay silent. For Dean, the moment became just another memory in a long career filled with bright lights and applause. But for the people who were there that night at the Sands Hotel, it was something unforgettable. They hadn't just watched a performance, they had witnessed character, the kind that turns an entertainer into a legend.